Hello, Votann lovers, and welcome back to Rock and Stone on 6 Plus Plus. It's Tom, very lowest of men here, and I'm here to talk all things dwarves with you because finally there is a little glimpse of hope. We have the Votann Codex announced. Don't know exactly when it's coming, but it's not too far away. And crucially, we have a whole new wave of models coming for the Leagues of Votann. I think this is fascinating. It's really interesting to try and see what they're thinking in terms of the direction of the faction. And obviously, as Votann players, it's really fun to start speculating. Speculating because they're dwarves, they're miners, they speculate. Get it? You like it? I like that. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, it's fun to speculate about the direction of the faction and the direction of the rules as well. And I think in the units they've been given, we can definitely see a few really interesting things. And I think it's going to be really fun trying to piece together where this is heading next. So I'm going to have a look down through the new models they've announced and what I think they might mean for the faction. And then we can speculate a little bit about the book and the directions we might see there as well. So if we're thinking about these new kits, we've got 6 new plastic kits coming alongside the Codex. And the great thing about these is that you've got multiple builds in a couple of them, which means we're effectively getting a bunch of new units. And I think that's really, really cool. Before we get into the units themselves, and I have to say I'm probably more enthused by the units than the characters because, characters flesh out a faction, but units are the bones and the meat that the whole thing really runs on. But we've got this incredible model for Buri Egnisson. Now, the Emberg Egnir block, they are a Votann block that were devoured by the Tyranids. I've actually talked about these on Rock and Stone before. They're really cool. They produced the Mad Votann. The Votann that was left behind is really mad now because its whole kind of league got devoured. But not Buri. Buri made it through alive. Buri is a big, tough cookie of a Carl, really. Looking at the model, he's another Carl type model, but he's got a huge glaive here. He's got... he's wearing a Tyranid as a hat, which, style points. Nice to see the kind of theme of the edition kind of worked in here as well. And the rules hinted at here that he'll have the classic 2-up, get back up rule on his data sheet as well. So I think Buri, again, it'll all come down to cost and how punchy he is with that glaive. But a 2-up, get back up unit is extremely useful in 40k. It gives you an activation locking option, gives you a scoring option, and can frustrate the enemy on a flank or something like that. So I think if Buri is half decent in combat, which his weapon suggests he absolutely should be, this feels like a unit you're definitely going to want. I'm excited to see what kind of units he can lead. But definitely a punchy, get back up again character is really obnoxious, especially when you've already got Uthar, who's also very durable. Or a couple of special characters running about being irritating really definitely gets me excited. So I like the look of Buri. Moving it along, we have the Arkanyst Evaluator. Now, Deadly Gunner is the words that jumped out at me here, right? This looks like a little plug-in shooting character. Now, we've seen this. We've seen this for other armies be incredibly effective. The shock attack gun comes to mind. Now, exactly how powerful this guy will be and what buffs he'll be handing out remains to be seen. But I like the idea of a gunner with multiple fire modes, so adding flexible sort of support potentially to a little unit in a Sagittar. And again, we'll see who he's meant to lead, but I assume it's Ironkin Warriors. And I think this is one of those units where if the price point and the damage point lands well, then multiples of these scooting about in transports immediately feels like something you might look at, especially if there's a detachment that really amps up the shooting. And I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation. Definitely something to look at in the future. But the Arkanyst, I think he looks like he might well be a plug-in. May well be a good enhancement taker if there's a nice gun there that you can soup up, and gives you another kind of sort of plug-in shooting character. Obviously, we're just starting to see some use of Grimnirs in that way. Now they've got a bit cheaper, but this might be even better than that. So very exciting for him. Next up, we have the Memnyr Strategist. So the Memnyr Strategist, to me, gives me Spirit Seer vibes. That's the kind of vibe I'm getting from this guy. They talk about him being plugged into Steeljacks, which I think makes a lot of sense. We'll talk about Steeljacks in a minute, but for me, they are occupying a kind of Wraithguard type role here, as a sort of mid-sized infantry, potentially a bit slower, but like in service to the faction. And that's why I'm thinking that the Memnyr might be giving them some buffs into that effect and be a little bit like a Spirit Seer. Maybe there'll even be some res potential here. That would be really cool if you can put robots back together, but that's all remaining to be seen. I love the model for this. I love the little data pad he's writing on. Really like his little tentacles and everything else here. And I've got a big soft spot for the Ironkin in general. So I think he's really, really cool in that sense. So ultimately, he's going to come down to whether the Steeljacks need him and what his role is. But I do really like that we've not only got a new unit coming through, but we've got a plug-in character for that unit as well, adding lots of variety and flavour. Speaking of Steeljacks, here they are. Now, these look awesome. I think these are really exciting to me. I think a different kind of infantry is cool. I think a greater representation for the Ironkin besides Little Idiots is also really cool. And you've got a unit here that looks like it's got some good combat options and some good shooting options, and is also, in theory, going to be tougher, right? So it'll be interesting to see what form that takes. Are they going to have an invuln? Is there a 2-up save there? What's the deal? And I think how the buffs apply to these will be a big deal as well. But I think it's cool to have a different type of infantry unit that's not the Thunderkin, to sort of anchor the sort of larger size of stuff. And one thing we'll speculate a bit, but if there's a detachment that really buffs up Ironkin, you'd imagine there might be, then that's probably where you'd be looking at lots of Steeljacks, but hopefully they'll work as a plug-in anyway. It's all going to come down to the datasheet rules and what sorts of extra things they bring to the table. But certainly more Vulcanite for dev wounds and more melee looks all very reasonable so far, and more tough boys on the table is also really good. So these are great. My favourite is definitely the Fist and Pistol. I really like those models, but I'm very excited to see how they get on. And there's talk of critical hits on an objective receiving precision, which might be relevant, be interesting to see. I think that's going to come down to the nature of the guns and the nature of the other buffs you can put on them. Okay, let's get a tiny bit apprehensive now. We have the Cthonian Earthshakers. So for me, I love these models. I really like the Chthonians. I think the Berserks are some of my favourite part of the whole Votann range. I think artillery is always an interesting one, right? I think it's quite cool for Votann to have a bit more artillery. It'll be interesting to see what the actual output and damage on these are, and whether they have similar sorts of effects to the mole launchers, like slowing. Anything that disrupts and impacts the opponent is very interesting. They look really cool. They might well serve as good backfield screening as well. And ultimately, it's going to come down to, right, are we looking at like Imperial Guard type, mortar type shooting, where it's a bit anemic, but they're cheap enough that you screen out your backfield with them? Are we looking at really heavy duty Exorcist type damage? Are there options to have multiple? It does mention different weapon types and profile types. That remains to be seen. What I do absolutely love is the little Ironkin who is loading the gun. Look at him. One absolute star. I love that. You got the Berserks, the Cthonian Berserks doing the buttons. He's sticking the shells in the Rissal. And yeah, this will be an interesting one. Obviously, artillery builds can end up being incredibly obnoxious and incredibly powerful, like the Plague Burst Crawler at the moment. Be surprised if that's where they were going with this. But obviously, if Votann end up as a meta-defining artillery army, so be it. That's not what I'd want for them, but I do love these models, and I would like to have very good reasons to include a couple of them on the table. Now, this is, I think, for me, one of the very exciting aspects of this release, the Kapricus. So, Kapricus, a bit like the Steeljacks, who I forgot to mention, but have a ranged and a melee build. With the Kapricus, you've got essentially a small transport, which they say is for Jaegers, so that's going to have a splitting capacity, I assume, a bit like the Sagittar does. But you've also got just a small gun vehicle, and there's talk of having a Magna Rail gun on there, autocannons, repeaters, various different things. So this is going to be an interesting little transport that's going to have some, by the look of it, some of the standard sort of damage to autocannon type guns that Votann normally have, and then you can ramp it up to just be a full shooting platform as well. It looks small. It's a sort of almost Sagittar-sized Pioneer floater, right? It's very similar to the bikes, but just a bit bigger, and it has a bit of a transport capacity. I really like the kind of transport game for Votann. I did kind of want a proper dedicated gun tank, but I think with this, actually, it's almost the complete double down, where it's like, well, Sagittar's land forts, Kapricus, you can get all your dwarfs mid-board really quickly with a whole range of different vehicles. You can split different units up. I quite like the idea of being able to split Jaegers up, because you often want them for a scout lane, but actually, do you want the whole 10 out there? Probably not. Quite fun to keep 5 of them back. And the potential give and go and activation locking with transports that this will unlock between the Kapricus, the Sagittar, and the land fort, to me is extremely exciting, especially if we get a detachment that leans heavily into either the Hernkin or the vehicles in general, right, and the transports especially. I'd love a sort of Votann Sky Splinter type vibe where there's a lot of different transports doing all sorts of crazy things. I suspect this will probably be quite cheap in points. Looking at it, it doesn't look too tough. Which I think will be a big appeal of it, and I think this may be where a lot of money ends up getting spent in this release. Is, if you're going to want several of these, I expect that's going to be quite a buy-in for a Votann player. But like the Sagittar, once you've got a bunch of them, you'll be very glad that you do. So I'm excited about the Kapricus, and I really love the idea of a sort of dedicated transports sort of rush of lots of different things. Whether the Sagittar stays as a dedicated transport, we'll see, right? But if it goes to 3 Sagittar, 3 Kapricus or something like that, that's still really interesting. But if you can go even more than that, that's very intriguing. And I do love the idea of full scoring MSU with lots of dwarfs. Probably not the strongest build in the meta right now, but definitely an interesting thing if the meta shifts away into an MSU kind of place in the future. So, I mean, that's it for the releases. What I like here is we've got a whole bunch of completely new things. We've got artillery, we've got a sort of more heavy mech type option, we've got some supporting characters that do very different things to what we already had. And in the Kapricus, you've got a small skirmisher tank or a small skirmisher transport, both really useful because ultimately Votann can do MSU, but I don't think the sort of early trading is easy for them, especially on the speed front. You don't really want to commit Pioneers. You don't really want to commit Berserks and Sagittars too early. So these might let you skirmish a little bit before you commit the real stuff. As far as the Codex goes, it talks about the army rule being entirely rewritten. I think this is good. I've made my peace with Judgment. I think it's okay. But I think it was clear that it didn't quite serve the purposes we needed. So there's mention of yield points. There's 5 detachments, which I think is fantastic. We've got 21 data sheets now, which includes the split out options as well. So I think that's really cool. And if we're thinking about the direction here, I mean, what are we expecting? Realistically, probably a Cronus Hegemony style melee detachment, probably a Ymir style shooting one. I don't know. I'd be interested to see where they decide Oathband sits. There'll be a repackaged version of Oathband. And then if I was guessing, I would say probably a Rangers and Scouts type detachment and an Ironkin detachment. I think that'd be a really nice spread. I'm interested to see if that is the direction they go. I think my concern with the focused like Ironkin or Hernkin type direction is that the range isn't that big. So if you lean too hard down in that direction, you might cut things off. So I'm hopeful that they might get a bit more creative than this and find other ways to express the rule set than leaning into like the sub factions within the faction at this stage. I don't personally feel the book isn't and the army is necessarily big enough for that, but if they do it well and they make those detachments permissive enough and flexible enough, I think that could still be really good. What I do think is that I think Votann are going to have a fantastic end of the year. I think the new combat patrol is cool as well. I think that'll get people in the game with Votann nice and quickly. Those are all units people want, gets them in nice and fast. I think Votann are having a nice moment at the moment because they're back. There's lots of big stuff out there for them to hunt. I think what you want is interesting rules, interesting ways to express skill on the tabletop, an army rule that's a little bit more interesting and gives you a bit more agency, and hopefully some nice little tweaks to data sheets here and there just to make the range feel interesting and fresh, and hopefully the new things bring some new tools. I think there's definitely a lot of scope here. Votann ultimately still have a small range. I think we've just seen a book in World Eaters that demonstrates you can have them for small range and be phenomenally flavorful and interesting. It's all about the data sheets and the synergies with detachments and the impact that can have on the field. But I've got a good feeling about Votann. And what I will certainly be doing is absolutely chaining this book, playing it a bunch, making a bunch of content for you guys in the future. And I will, of course, get Jake and James back on for Rock and Stone, tap into some other good Votann mains I have contacts with as well, try and play it on fight nights, and try and build a huge comprehensive guide for this army as much as I'm able as well. Fantastic. Yeah, really excited to see what comes next. And I will certainly be buying myself several Kapricus because that feels like idiots in transports, man. I can't quit them. Never been able to quit them at all. All right, that's it for me for now. And obviously, do let me know what sorts of things you'd like to see in terms of Votann content once the book is with us. And I will do my very best to make as much of that for you as I can. Lowest of Men out. See ya. Bye-bye.